Well, hi, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Speed Tips by Bob and Chad. We're all ready to go for the evening for the next hour and ready to take your questions and get going. Race season, man, they raced down there in Florida last weekend, and that was pretty exciting. And they raced out in Park Jefferson, out in Iowa, there this weekend, and that was pretty cool. So things are getting started here. I hope we don't pay for this good weather in April, but it is what it is. It's cool to see them racing already.
Yeah, Peyton's deal looked like it was pretty good turnout.
Yeah, it did. Looked like they had great car count, and it looked like it was a pretty good show. I didn't watch it on IMCA TV. I was going to the one night, and then I don't know, something come up, and I decided to do something different, or I don't know what happened. But normally, I watch all those shows. So, what's new and exciting at Weir's Machine?
Well, we had an interesting Monday here. Just a normal chaos. Every week we start off with all our meetings, and last weekend we were down in Des Moines there for the Iowa Deer Classic, working the Trick Outdoors brand and the new Mav Hunt Wyatt e-bike. So now we switch gears today, and we're getting ready for this upcoming weekend, the Midwest Motorsports Expo in Rochester at the Mayo Civic Center Saturday, 9 to 4. We got 47 companies signed up. It'll be $10 to get in. There's free parking. We're pretty excited. We were hoping for 50 companies. We're only a couple short. There's only 5 10x10 booths left, so we're pretty proud. We got really good companies on board. Sounds like we got quite a few people coming. Hopefully the weather's going to be crappy enough that everybody will just want to come inside and look at race parts and check out the new stuff and see what's going on and bench race and get excited, even more excited than we all are for the season. So
Sure.
Couldn't be happier. Josh Ruby's been working hard. My guys have been working hard trying to grow this into something. Last year, I think we had 32 companies. So this year, 47. We're really excited. We got some big brands. I'll just read through all of them. Obviously, us, Weir's Machine, and Kevco are the major ones behind it. So we're going to be there in full force. We'll have the Circle Track app there on a tablet, so everybody can play with that if they want to. Got Mississippi Thunder Speedway, Longacre Racing Products, Carl Customs, The Dirt Show, Rage Chassis, AFCO, Arrow Race Wheels, Willwood, Bob Harris Enterprises, Chateau Speedway, Speedway Illustrated magazine's coming. We're really excited about that. They'll be taking good pictures and getting some stories from people. And Fast Shafts, PEM, Denny Fuller CPD Shocks, Diamond Motorsports out of Ohio will be there with tons of parts. So come and get your last minute items, putting your car together for the season. Scorza will have the scorekeepers there. Mankato Motorsports, Velocita, Deer Creek Speedway, Zach's Trailer Sales, Dirt Dueler Chassis, Quick Car, B&B Racing Chassis, Performance Bodies and Parts, Trace My Space, Buyer's Engine Service, Midwest Motorsports, Outsider Performance Products, Schaefer's Racing Oil, Western Iowa Non-Wing Sprint Cars, the Outlaw Mini Mod Series, Spring Rhythm, Dynamic Drivelines, Batwing Chassis, Wyatt Bikes, Superior Quality Rides, Corey Crapser, CRC, Outlaw Mini Mod. That must be on here twice. I read that already. DH Mud Off, Freedom Race Lifts, Dyer's Top Rods, Fairmont Raceway, Synergy Suspension, CTS Trailer Sales, IMCA Old Timers, and Kelly Printing and Signs. So, that's a pretty awesome group of Circle Track companies and a couple other ones mixed in there. So we're really excited. We'd really like to keep growing this thing. So if we get enough people through the door Saturday, that's only going to get more companies the bigger companies looking at it. We need people to show up, come from a couple hours away, and we're trying hard to get a little regional show. Not to say we're going to compete with PRI, but to have some Midwest show that focuses more on circle track racing and circle track products. We think there's definitely a need for it. Do a 1-day show, get it done quick, get in, get out, and so if we can get some people there, get the numbers up, and we'll get even bigger companies next year, we feel.
Awesome. Well, that sounds like a very good group of people.
Yeah, we're excited. It's going to be fun.
It sounds like something that everybody needs to do on Saturday. What the hell else you got to do Saturday? Might as well go to the show.
Exactly.
Meet with your buddies and talk strategy for the season, for whatever's going on, and good to go. Well, we're open for questions. If anybody's got any questions that you want to ask, otherwise, we got Chad's deal this coming weekend, the Midwest show this weekend, and then next weekend we go to Pennsylvania for the Race Tech Info by Close Racing Supply chassis school. And Joel's going to have an open house that same time, so there's going to be lots of people there. And he's got quite a few products on sale. He's got some really good specials. And so all of you guys that are in that area definitely need to come. And like I said, I know the school is full, but Joel's still going to have his open house, and so you need to come and enjoy his open house and talk with some of the vendors that he's going to have for the open house there. First question, Sport Mod running a crate, 2 or 3 disc clutch. I still believe in the 3 disc clutch. I mean, they're pretty foolproof. I know some guys are running the 2 disc clutch, but with that crate motor, you're going to spend the money. You might as well buy a 3 disc clutch. Just less chance of something going wrong or whatever the case is. So that's my opinion, 3 disc clutch. Rick, how do you feel about springs and shocks behind on the left rear 4-bar IMCA car? What changes to the shock would you need to make? Thank you. Well, there's a lot of straight line traction with that spring and shock both behind the housing. There's definitely more traction with that. You need to probably have a little bit stiffer axle dampener shock, because when you take that shock away from the front of the housing, the car is going to get, it's going to be a little bit, or could be a little unstable getting into the corner. So that's kind of the thing to watch. Shock changes wise, there's not a big change in the shock. It's just a little bit less compression and a little bit more rebound is basically the only thing that's different, but it's pretty similar. Dave, have a question regarding setting caster on the front end of a modified. Best tool to check caster with, and is there a rule of thumb degree setting on the left and the right? Kind of depends on what your chassis builder recommends. Some people like more caster than others, but as a rule of thumb, best tool for checking caster, I've got that digital intercomp gauge. I think that deal is bulletproof. I think it works extremely well, and I'm very pleased with it. It's very durable. I mean, I've had one for years, and it still works perfectly fine. The other thing, as far as the rule of thumb goes, camber and caster, the camber on the right front, somewhere anywhere between 6 and 7 degrees anymore. We're running a lot more camber than we used to. Casters usually between 4 and 5 degrees. The left front caster is usually about 2 degrees and camber is about 4 degrees. So that should get you. I mean, that's a pretty standard setting. But once again, I would go with whatever your chassis builder tells you to do. I'd highly recommend following what their instructions would be or what their setup manual has to say. What's your thoughts on a pull bar mount on the chassis? Tied to just the bottom of the chassis or the top of the chassis or both? Well, we've tried lots of different things. I think the bottom of the chassis seems to have a little bit more traction, but I don't think it's as stable on corner entry. So we're probably about 3 to 4 inches above the X on the chassis, and that seems to be pretty stable. 3 inches probably is a good spot. We used to be higher than that, and there's definitely a little bit of traction with a little bit more angle. Works pretty good. You get too much angle, you get too low, the car gets a little skittish getting into the corner. It doesn't want to get on the right front, or it gets on the right front too hard, and that kind of can But that's kind of my opinion on that. I hope that answered your question there. Any new products or anything you got going on there, Chad?
We're always working on new stuff. We'll have a couple things to release in the next couple of weeks, but it's this time of year in build season, it gets a little harder to make the new stuff because we're throttled up trying to keep the stuff going out the door, and the machine shop doesn't have as much time to work on our new brainstorms as they do when we're a little bit slower. So, but we do have some exciting things coming. A new Ultra Force design, which is going to probably ruffle some feathers. So we're excited about that. Working on a couple new tools that we're testing. So little modifications there also. So we're always, I've said it before and I'll say it again. I think we got the greatest team of racers and engine builders and chassis builders. And the ideas are just, it's hard to keep up because there's so many great people with great ideas, and they come to us. We take such great care of them, and we care about the industry, and I don't think anybody meets our passion level. So just a great group of guys coming up with cool stuff to make our product line better and the industry better, whether it's something to make you go faster or make it easier to work on the car. There's no doubt that I think we got the best team.
Well, definitely the tools that you create make it easier to work on the car, which, granted, I like speed, but if I got to work on it, I want it to be easy, or as easy as it can be.
Yeah.
And having the right tools, that's a key, man.
Yeah.
I'd
like to touch on that caster question there. A lot of guys take that little small square digital angle finder and they put it on the spindle. You got to be careful there because inside that thing is a gyro. So when you have that tipped back at an angle and you have the camber in the car, you need to make sure that thing is square to the camber direction to properly read the caster. So that's one thing. We started doing that, and then we put that flat on the spindle checkers and we put that angle finder on there. And we realized that, if we didn't square that up, we were off. So that's something to just make sure you're paying attention to. If you're going to use one of them little square digital levels on the spindle, you got to use another one to square that one to the world.
Yeah, good point. Yeah, very good point.
So next weekend at Close's deal, if you're in the area and you're not signed up for the school, you can still come after the school. What time do we get done?
Well, like I told you, the manual's 212 pages long, so I think it's going to be I doubt that the school itself will get done before 5, but we'll probably go till 5. I wouldn't surprise me at all. I usually like to be done closer to 4:30, but we got a lot of stuff to cover, and when there's that many different types of rear suspensions, the rear suspension is phenomenal because we've got quite a few. It's not like our mod 4-link school or our sport mod school where you just have one one rear suspension. We've got 4 rear suspensions. And so it'll take a little while to cover that. And hopefully, and we've got a lot of their street stock that they call a street stock, which is basically a highly modified stock car. It doesn't look nothing like a street stock, and has adjustable rear suspension compared to it. Still has the OEM 4-link, but there's nothing OEM about it other than the locations. Jig's got a question. Solid pull bar on the rear end on a 3-link UMP Sport Mod. Is it best mounted in front of the rear end or centered or behind? Solid one, we actually mount that. Ours is mounted centered because what it'll do is you're still going to get a little bit of axle wrap out of it due to the fact that you're going to get some rear steer involved, with that angle and that left lower. It definitely gets more rear steer, and that creates more axle wrap because of that fact. So you're definitely going to have some of that going on. Aaron, IMCA stock car with the new ride height rules. Do you feel it's better to load a softer left rear like an 85 and not be so close to the rule, or run 125 and be close to the rule ride height? I'd almost split the difference and go with a 100-pound rule and try to be as close to the ride height as I can. But I'm kind of one of them guys that tends to like to push the issues a little bit. But of course, I wouldn't want to see anybody get DQ'd. So, and they're they're firm on that deal. I mean, it's not like it's close. Close is not close enough. It's got to be right on. So they don't mess around. Chad, concerning 3-piece spindles on USRA modified, how do you check the taper in the top and the bottom of the spindles and make sure you have the correct ball joint being used? I can't find any info on taper degrees. Does your spindle checker do this?
So our spindle checker does not. Ours screws onto the bottom of the upper stud and points at the lower stud. So mainly designed for, when you're at the track and you get into contact in the heat, you can screw that on real quick, after the contact, and know if that right front or left front suspension needs to be worked on. So the only one that will check the taper is, I believe All-Star makes one that has the pieces that go into the spindle and then you slide the rod through. So that would be the one to check the taper to see if the tapers are still, fitting right, or if they're ovaled out or oblonged or whatever after a crash. But as far as the right ball joint and the wrong ball joint, you would an upper taper is different than a lower taper. So if you buy an upper ball joint, the spindle should be reamed correctly for an upper ball joint. And I think the only ones that MB runs a upper ball joint and the lower, so those are reamed different. But that's, as far as I know, that's the only one that's goofy in the industry.
Yeah, the upper ball joint is 1.5 inch ream, and then most of the lower ball joints are 2-inch ream. Donald says he's going to see us in a few weeks at Close Racing. Well, we're looking forward to it. I'm looking forward to coming out there. Chad was out there last year for the open house, but I did not make the trip last year, so I'm looking forward to it this year. We've been working on the book and finally got that to the printer today, and so we're loading the trailer and everything this week, and it's going to leave a week from today and head that direction. What does shortening the solid pull bar and moving it to the front slot on the pinion of a Weir's quick change pull bar mount promote or center line? I don't know. What's your opinion there, Chad?
Well, shortening of the pull bar is going to be less traction. Moving it forward is going to be less traction. So I would say that would probably be less traction, probably all the way around. anytime you shorten that link, you're going to take traction away. It's going to be more instant traction than longevity traction. So kind of depends on what you're looking for there.
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, it just all depends. I would run longer rather than shorter if I possibly could. Shorter gives you instant traction quickly, but it goes away very fast. And the center is designed going in the center of the pull bar is going to be the most place to react equally, center to behind. How vital are gas shocks over oil shocks in the hobby stock class with the ride height this year? Well, I'm not gonna. I mean, the twin tube shock is a great shock. You guys don't run a tremendous amount of laps, so the only downside to the twin tube shock is the fact that it runs a little warmer because you got a lot smaller piston displacing oil compared to the gas shock's got a lot bigger piston in it, and it runs a little smoother. The gas shock tends to be, I think maybe a little more stable in rougher type conditions. The twin tube shock definitely has good traction, so it would be hard for me to tell you that I'd rush out and buy a set of gas shocks if you've already got a good set of twin tube shocks. We sell a lot of gas shocks. I mean, it's like 9-to-1 over twin tube stuff. So the industry tends to, and we've worked very hard with the gas shock to get it to perform traction wise like the twin tube shock does. And so there's been so many gains, different piston designs, and they're constantly always working on something. I mean, Bobby got a new piston in today and was all excited about that and was working with that and playing with that. And I never heard what we ended up with it, but I know he was messing with some new stuff today. So it's a never-ending battle. The twin tube stuff just doesn't have the evolution behind it as compared to the gas shock. What does shortening a pull bar and moving it to the, did we already answer that one? Yeah, we already answered that one. Joshua, cars tight on corner entry and wanting to develop a push in the center on throttle and off throttle, trailed the right rear an inch, and it helped tremendously on throttle, but still struggling off the throttle. Well, an off throttle push is kind of can be an issue. Usually that's a right rear where the right rear is definitely getting on the right rear too hard, and your push is coming from you've got so much side bend on the right rear that's where, if it doesn't make any difference on or off throttle, that's what I would say. And if, I don't know what kind of car you have, or if it's a modified or whatever the case is, but if you've got a Panhard bar, I'd definitely raise that up, move the right rear out, put a 1/2-inch spacer on the right rear, move the right rear out. What other things would you suggest, Chad?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes if you have to make a drastic change like that and it helps, but it doesn't cure the whole thing, then you need to analyze your entry more than your exit. And exactly what you said there, it's got to be somewhat of an imbalance there, whether the Panhard bar is too low, making it tip over too much, and just sticking the right rear so hard that it doesn't transfer to the right front. There's some sort of imbalance there. Anytime you got to make a massive wheelbase change to get reaction, which you'll get the most reaction probably from a wheelbase change, tells me that there's imbalance mechanically somewhere else.
Jared says he likes his Bilstein gas shocks and his hobby stock. Bilstein makes a good product. There's no doubt about it. Taylor, on my IMCA modified, does anti-dive in the race car have an effect on traction? I don't really know if I could say that it has a big effect on traction. It's more of a brake and a spring situation, because the only time it really actually goes into play is under braking. So I mean, it could, if you didn't have any anti-dive in it, because it goes over on the right front too hard, it could cause you some traction issues. But that would be the only time I would say that it would be a traction deal. Once you're powered up and off the brakes, it makes no difference. Greg's got an IMCA Sport Mod. Try loosening it up on corner entries. Soften up the right front and the left rear, and had all rear brakes before. What happens is sometimes softening up the right front gets the car over on the right rear, because once again, anytime you soften the right front, it's going to get on the right rear more, and that's another side bite issue, like the previous guy talked about. If you get too much side bite, especially on a sport mod, if you're running a crate motor, they don't have the actual power to blast the throttle to lift that car back up and help turn it. So the car lays on the right rear, and until you actually blast the throttle in mid corner, and what's going to happen is you're finally going to get it to turn in mid corner, and then it's going to be snappy loose coming off the corners. So now you're going to be struggling with, you got a tight entry and loose off, and it's all because the entry's too tight. Once again, Panhard bar up on the right rear, move the rear end a little bit, like an eighth of an inch or a quarter of an inch to the right. Since you're a sport mod, you can't run wheel spacers, so, and you can't, you don't have many different offsets that you can use, only a 3 or a 4, and a 4 would make your problem worse. Unless you're running a 4, then I definitely would go to the 3, and I think it would make your problem better. On a Camaro clip car, what do you think would be the best center link and idler arm, pitman arm to use? Do you think the Camaro spindle is better, or something like the Impala spindle? With that Camaro clip deal, I like putting the Impala spindles on them. I think they're an inch taller spindle. And when we built Camaro clip cars, that's what we always used. And then when we used to build Camaro clip cars, we used the stock OEM manufactured center link and idler arm, all the stock stuff, so that it kept everything pretty much stock in line. Now I know there's some companies that make some center links that help with bump steer and stuff like that. If your rules allow, you might want to look into them. I think AFCO makes one. But other than that, we always use stock OEM parts. And like I said, I kind of like this Impala spindle because I just thought it's an inch taller than and I think it looks a lot better. Let's see. On a 3-link modified, would you prefer a 2-off all the way around with a 3-inch on the right rear, or 3-inch with the 4-inch on the right rear? No, I'm not a fan of that 4-inch on the right rear. I think that sucks that rear end in too tight or in too much. It gets it too close to the center of gravity and the roll center. And I think it rolls on the right rear too much. The wider car would be better, more stable. I think the wider car is going to have more traction, just because it's not tipping and loading and unloading that right rear. So I would definitely go with the 2s all the way around with a 3 off on the right rear. That'd be my suggestion. Because what we actually do is our modifieds, we run wheel spacers, 1-inch wheel spacers on the two fronts and the left rear. So then we run 3-inch wheels all the way around with 1-inch wheel spacers, except for the right rear. And then we've got the right rear that we can put a 1/2-inch wheel spacer on if we get to a heavy racetrack or something like that. Any info on inner pivot tie rods using Heims versus stock inner outlets? Boy, I don't know what to say about that one. Any info on inner pivot tie rods using Heims versus stock tie rods or center links? Well, if your rules allow, I definitely would probably look at, getting one of those tie rod adapters and then putting a Heim joint on there would be my choice if I could do that. Otherwise, that would be better than the tie rod ends, in my opinion. How many nights do you like on a set of shocks before I should send them back in for freshening fluids and rebuilds? Well, 20 to 25 nights, in my opinion, is probably pretty good. I always recommend customers start fresh at the beginning of the year, and then they can send them in mid-season sometime and usually get themselves pretty close to the end of the year. Usually only have to rebuild them once.
Yeah, a lot of that also has to do with the track conditions. I mean, early on in the season here, if it's moist and you get some rough tracks, and some of them rough track nights that's worth like 7 or 8 nights on the shock. I mean, you really gotta, when you talk about your notebook and pay attention to conditions and what the life expectancy of your springs and your shocks and all your components are. The variable is the speedway. When you're racing in monster truck status, it's way different than when it's smooth and slick. So just because he says 25 nights, you need to also think about how violent some of them rough tracks are.
And the thing is make sure you take good care of the shocks. Take the shocks off every week, clean them up real good with Windex or some other cleaner so that you can clean them real good so that the dirt's not laying on there and getting in the rod guide. I take a toothbrush and go around the rod guides and get the dirt out of there so that dirt is not caked on that rod guide, so that when it goes in and out, it forces dirt down into the shock. Greg said he's got an open motor. Well, with an open motor, you definitely you're going to be in better shape. Still, you're running a 2-barrel carburetor, so it's not real throttle responsive, but it's definitely better than a crate motor, no doubt. Okay, the second part to the question about the Weir's quick change pull bar mount. I shortened the solid pull bar so I could keep the same pinion angle as the inch longer one I had that had a bad high mount. So I lengthened the pull bar and moved it back to the center line or behind. Even will it promote traction on a PowerPoint Midwest Modified? I don't know what power.
All right, or something, yeah, power.
Power.
Yeah, that moving it back, I think on a solid bar makes more traction.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think it definitely does. Now, you don't want to go too crazy. I mean, inch to an inch and a half is good enough. In a modified, if a person was tuning off their 3-inch number on the right front, how would a softer spring like a 450 versus a stiffer spring like a 650 affect the car's handling with the same 3-inch number?
Well, the stiffer initial rate is going to not move as quickly, right? So
Right.
if you have a softer, you're 450 pounds per inch or 650 pounds per inch. So when you match that bottom number, your initial movement is going to be easier on the 450 pound spring versus a 650 pound spring. the problem you run into is when you go that drastic, your ride height's going to vary. So you have to balance out how soft you go based on if you can or cannot manipulate your ride height with a limiter, whether it's the shock or a chain, so that you don't get the ride height so screwed up. There's so many guys that go feel like they got to have a 300-pound spring in the right front, but then their ride height is an inch high, which changes the roll center so much the car don't turn anyway. So you're trying to put a softer spring in there to get the car down and make it rotate, but at the end of the day, the roll center is so bad that it doesn't really, it cancels it out. So you really got to be careful. But the load stick, in tuning that, there's gains to be had there. You just got to always pay attention to your ride height and what you're trying to achieve there.
Chad, do you guys make a shock rack? Can I find one in your books?
So we make a pin for a shock rack for Ryan at Jarovitz Motorsports. He makes the shock racks, but we don't have one ourselves. So if you give Ryan a call, he's got them in stock.
What is the preferred bushing for the trailing arms to compete against Stone Motorsports trailing arm bushings for the hobby stock? Well, I'm not aware of the bushings that Stone Motorsports has, but from what experience that I've had with those bushings, the old stock OEM bushing from Napa Auto Parts is bulletproof. I mean, it might not have the instant traction that some of these magic bushings have, but these magic bushings last 4 or 5 nights. And it's a good question. Actually, we did a video this week on trailing arms for the stock car, and we sell a premium trailing arm where there's some of those trailing arms that are pretty thin, and we had a customer that took all his trailing arms off after we talked about how stiff these new ones are, and his trailing arm mounts were all bent to the point where even bent enough that the bushing was starting to come out of the trailing arms. So once again, make sure you've got good quality trailing arms. But like I said, I'm not sure what Stone Motorsports' trailing arm assembly is for a hobby stock. I'm quite sure they're probably selling you a good piece. I'm not one that like to change bushings that often, so I'm not always in favor of some of the new latest greatest ideas, but maybe they've got a good thing. And like I said, I don't know the product, so I can't say it's good or bad. All I know is we run the stock. Like I said, all our bushings come from Napa. Jared, the flat Z28 pitman arm and center link, or the non-power steering pitman arm and center link on the Camaro? Question mark.
Depends on if you can mix and match, right? I mean, it depends on what class, right?
Yeah, it depends on the class. And it also depends on if you can mix and match that stuff. The biggest thing is you just gotta make sure that you've got your bump steer comes out right. I mean, that's the biggest thing with the front end, is making sure that everything is correct on the bump steer, because you don't want to have some trick part that now all of a sudden you got a ton of bump steer. Because I've driven a car that's had bad bump steer, and it's just a spook to drive. Luke, where are the measurements to new frame ride heights on the Sport Mod? They'd be on IMCA's website underneath their rules for the Sport Mod. Tie the car down so the car isn't bouncing going down the highway. Road to the track that's hard on the shocks also. Well, the biggest thing is you got to be careful how you tie the car down. You don't want to tie the car down on the rear end housing because then of course it could eventually bend the rear end housing. You want to tie the car down so that it limits the movement of the car, and you know it's best if you had like an airbag or something that you could put underneath that frame and tie it against that. But still, just tying it down, front suspension and rear suspension, tying it so that it doesn't bounce up and down going down the highway. It doesn't need to move. Sport mod needs to drive out of the corner straighter. Gets in good, feels like it carries good speed through the middle of the corner, does not seem loose off, just wants to drive straight, want it to drive straighter off the corner. Any suggestions? Usually run 2 inches of rear stagger. Um, I wouldn't change the stagger. I would just actually add some lead to the car, to be honest with you, because the 2 inches of stagger still, even though it doesn't feel loose, is kind of carrying you out. But if you put some lead in the left rear and take that left rear back a little bit, that definitely takes some of the static steer out of the car, or some of the dynamic steer out of the car, and that will definitely help the car quite a bit. And I'm not talking a lot. I mean, a quarter of an inch is a substantial increase. Steve, Levi Jones, there isn't anything to compete with them, in my opinion.
We're going to have to look up them Stone Motorsports bushings.
Yeah, and the Levi Jones ones too. Reese Digma, what should I be looking for on my rear's load stick on a stock car? Just binding?
So I mean that's one thing. Yeah, I mean the first time we built the first load stick, we took it and put it on Steve's car that works for me, and we put it on the right front. And we pulled it all the way down, and then we watched the load go as we were moving along, and the load spiked, and we found that the shock mount was bound up on the right front. The heim on the shock was binding. So load sticks, they're kind of like a poor man's pull down rig. So they will find binds like you do find on pull down rigs, but the most probably the most advantageous is tuning your car. So basically, like I said before, when that guy was talking about tuning that down number, so the load stick, once your car is scaled and you have your center to center distances on your shocks, you'll document that all on all four corners. And then you'll take the stick and you'll put that on at that center to center dimension, and that's going to give you a number. And that number then is when you're at the racetrack and you're tuning your car, if you're going to change the right from a 500 to a 550, you just take the spring out, put the 550 in, put the load stick on, go back to the center to center distance, wind the screw jack until you get the load that you scaled with, and then you can go right to the racetrack. So back in the old days when I was a crew chief and we had to do all these measurements and guess and shake the car, or leave the shop with like 10 different spring combinations scaled and all your numbers wrote down with your screw jacks, that is a thing of the past with the load stick. It lets you change your setup at the track and make sure that you're exactly how you would be scaled if you change that spring at the shock. The next thing would be the tuning that down number like we were talking about before. So once you get that static number dialed, and then you go to a race and you wanna go out on the racetrack, and you can't use your bump rubbers because when you go on the track or you have a bump in the racetrack, it's going to give you false readings. So painting your shock shafts with a Sharpie, clean them off, paint them up real good. You make a run, you'll see the dust line on your shock, and that's the down number. So then you have your homies push down on that to that dust ring or the wear mark on that Sharpie, and you write that number down. That's your down number. So the load sticks, the tuning, you're going to learn so much on the racetrack as far as your down number, and then tune on that. You can learn so much from each racetrack. When you win the feature that night, put the stick on. It's going to give you the number of what it was dynamically on the racetrack. A month down the road, you come to the same racetrack and you're terrible. and you put the stick on and your down number's off by 300 pounds. You know that you're way off that. So once you learn how to build your notebook and your database on that stick, you're going to only improve your program night in and night out. When you take the load stick on the stock car to the back, you're going to need to have setup sticks. So once you get your 4 center to centers, you'll have a stick made for the right and left rear in the back. So then when you put the load stick on the right side, you'll have a solid stick in the left side so that you're not, letting that rear end move around. That's the only way you'll get some accurate data. So on 2-link or the 4-link stock car and a 2-link mod or B mod, with a stick you can get it. With the cages on the 4-link cars, it's a little difficult because there's a lot of variables there, and we aren't getting very accurate data on the rear with the load sticks. So I know I rambled on a little bit there, but once you start using that load stick, I mean, it is amazing what we have learned in the 6 or 7 years that we've been, making load sticks, and what guys are learning race nights and how they're good and when they're good is the key to the load stick. So definitely one of the coolest tools that we've made.
Jim wants to know if there's a split bird cage, left rear bird cage.
Yeah, we have a split bird cage. Not legal in most scenarios, but yeah, it's definitely spectacular. So if you don't have really any kind of tech at your racetrack, we do still have all the ingredients. When Hoffman and I did that years ago and he won a bunch of money with it, it was pretty dynamite, and it still is. There's some guys running it, when there ain't no rules or whatever. So it's a lot of work to get it on your car, a lot of modifications to the chassis. But in my opinion, it's well worth it. So if there's no tech, I'd probably be playing with one.
RJ says, IMCA modified, I'm seeing more and more guys running a lot of camber. What's the advantage to that, and how do they keep it from hitting the shock? Well, that's the downside, is you got to move the shock absorber or relocate the shock absorber somewhat for adequate clearance. But now that we're getting the cars over in the right front so much more, we're actually seeing more camber in the right front. And it's kind of just the geometry that some of these guys are running right now. It's all about keeping the tire on the ground in through the middle of the corner, so that you've got the full 16 inches of tire on the ground in the front end to get the front end to stick better. Best length for a pull bar on an IMCA modified, in my opinion, is 28 to 30 inches. Les, any tricks or suggestions on setting Ackerman on a USRA modified? Do you have any experience with Ackerman?
Well, I mean, the only way to change it is to cheat the spindle, right? I mean, are you supposed to cut the arms apart and shorten them? I don't know, but are people doing it? I would assume so. So, on a stock spindle like that, there's no slot in there. There's no way to adjust the Ackerman. So the Ackerman is the distance from the ball joint to where the steering arm hooks on the spindle. And generally in the asphalt world, they play with it all the time. The spindles are built with a slug and a slot. So back in the day when I was an asphalt crew chief, we'd play with that based on whether we were at a short track or a bigger track, quarter mile to a half mile. So when it's shorter on the left side, that tire is going to turn more when you initially turn wheel. So it's going to gain basically toe out to turn into the corner. So Ackerman, we always did the left front Ackerman to help us turn into the corner and get that left front turning before the right front to get it to turn into the corner. So, but I'd be careful, if they see any kind of weird grinding marks and weld marks and whatnot, you're probably going to get your hand slapped.
Yeah, that I could see where there could possibly be some advantage there, but due to the fact that the loads on the left front aren't that strong they're heavy for a very short amount of period, that I don't know if the effort that you would have to go through, if the risk would outweigh the reward. I would be cautious about that.
Yeah, if you were on a place that was rubbered up and was like asphalt all the time, maybe. But Yeah, I mean, like you said, you're in backsteer so much that it contradicts itself then in backsteer.
Yeah, and I would really bet that USRA guy would like that. Chase, what's your opinion on a 20-inch 100-pound spring left rear for the UMP modified? Well, I'm not as big on the 20-inch spring. I think you could get by with a 16-inch spring. The 20-inch spring, you're going to have more apt to bend because you've got a lot more coils there. So it's going to definitely be a little bit more bow in that spring, which is going to make the spring last less long or shorter life to it. I think the 16-inch spring, I mean, a lot of guys are running 13-inch springs and then just running more, more coil or more load on them. So I'm not a fan of the 20-inch spring. I think a 16-inch spring would do everything you'd want it to do. I see no advantage to the 20-inch spring. We tried that, experimented with it a lot. All it did is bend springs. Matthew, optimum pull bar angle and how far left to right? Most cars like it in the center because, once again, anytime you try to put it towards the right or the left, whichever tire you're closest to is the tire it's going to influence the most. So, in other words, if you move it to the left, odds are you're going to have a mid-corner push because you're going to get a throttle push under load. If you go to the right, which a lot of the guys, especially with less horsepower, will go to the right because it seems to help pick the right rear up a little bit more, doesn't dive on the right front near as hard. And then as far as left to right, I like myself, I always put everything in the center. In the center of the rear end is then once again you're loading both tires equally. Angle wise, I don't know, 15 degrees is a very good angle. You get much more angle than that, and the car can get kind of spooky getting in. And Chad wants to say, Chad, just want to say that I bought a lot of Weir's products for the new car. Everything y'all is great quality.
Well, thank you, Chris. I appreciate that. That's what we strive here. You know, I tell my guys every day that we need to be the best. We need to make the best products, and when we're not, when we have a problem, we need to fix it. So we strive to be the best here. So I appreciate that.
Well, we're getting close to the top of the hour. Any other questions we've got, we'll sure take them. One thing I wanted to remind everybody, if you're watching this on the YouTube video, make sure you like us on YouTube and help us grow the YouTube channel as much as we possibly can. Everything I've learned tells me it doesn't matter which side is up on the right coilover. As far as the spring table, I was going off of the mounting points. I was recently told conflicting information. Could you weigh in on that, on your opinion? Well, it's all about the mounting location. If you're a modified where you're on coilovers, like you're saying, it's all about the mounting location top to bottom. The spring location makes absolutely no difference whatsoever where the spring is actually located at. A lot of guys run the springs lower, some guys run the springs higher. I don't see the effect on that. I would be interesting to see the conflicting information that you got in case there's something I need to learn. But as far as I know, that's what we've got. There you go, Chad.
Yeah, so I mean, when you're looking at the chassis and these 2 points here, that's the roll, that's the momentum roll of the car. So that's the point that matters. It doesn't know if that spring is on the top or the bottom. If, I've had a couple guys in my years say that they flipped the right rear over and put the spring up and it killed it. And I think it may have been more mental than anything, but there's no data that proves that as far as we know.
Justin wants to know when the BHE radiator screens will be available again. We got a whole bunch of them there. Justin, is it saying on the website that they're not available? Or did you call them? They said they weren't available? Because we've got them on the shelf. I would definitely call and talk to Austin tomorrow. And if it's a website deal, you let me know because we need to correct that. Ryan, thanks. You confirmed what I was thinking. Kevin, does Chad make a bracket to take 4-link bird cages to 3-link?
Yes, we do have a 200-17 CL, which is a cage lockup, and that works on our cages. You clamp it next door, and then there's a spacer that goes in between. So if you want to be a 2-link car or a 4-link car, you just take the 3 bolts in and out, and it'll lock it to the tube or unlock it and have the extra arm on there. So.
Well, we made it through the night without any glitches in our trusty internet system that we have here. That's exciting. That means we should have 3 or 4 more to go before it fails us again. So that's good. Don't forget about the show.
5 days away this Saturday, Rochester. Be there. It's going to be awesome.
You don't have anything else to do, you might as well go. If nothing else, you get to see some new parts, talk to all the vendors, talk to some of the racetracks that are going to be there, and best yet, get to talk to all your buddies that you haven't seen half the winter. Okay, Sean says, Bob, Austin got me going on some parts as soon as possible last week. Good employee and great service. Yeah, Austin does a very good job. He puts in a lot of effort and definitely for what he has to do in a day's time, he does a very good job. So I appreciate hearing that, Sean. I really do appreciate that. Justin says they're not available. Okay. Well, I will have to have them look into that tomorrow, and we'll see what the heck is going on. Hell of an effort by Kyle at Rocket this weekend. You know what that means?
I didn't get to watch. I was busy working in the Iowa Deer Classic.
Oh. Yeah, no doubt. All right. Well, looks like we're at the top of the hour. So we appreciate everybody that chimed in tonight. Good questions. Had a good count for people online here. So once again, we thank you for coming on and sharing this hour with us. And thank you, Chad, for all you do. And we will see you guys in 2 weeks, which would be the 11th, March 11th. No, not March 11th, March 18th. That'll be right after we get back from Pennsylvania.
Cool. Should be good. Thanks, everybody.
All right. Have a good night.